Guys, this week's topic is a really important one that we haven't covered a lot, and it's about backcountry first aid. Backcountry meaning just being in the field. So it doesn't matter if you're way in the backcountry or you're base camping or whatever. This first aid is this information is coming at you from somebody who spent years and multiple deployments overseas in combat zones as a combat medic, to somebody who now creates these outdoor first aid kits called Jimmy Kits, and they're really cool. This is a great episode, and you're going to get a lot out of it. Let's go. There exists a threat, from anti-hunting groups to politicians trying to give our land away, and we won't stand for it. Those vast western landscapes provide the space for our wildlife to thrive, and a place for hunters and anglers to fuel the fire that sparks their soul. In this show, we share our love of hunting, fishing, and conservation. Here, we provide the foundation to meet these threats through passion and the grit of the American outdoorsman. Welcome to the Western Huntsman Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of the Western Huntsman Podcast. This is Jim Huntsman coming at you from the Broken Time Studio right here in Hayden, Idaho. And I am pumped for this episode. This is a really, really good one. And it's a topic I've been wanting to talk about for a super long time, all centered around first aid and what to carry with you when you're in the field. Again, like I said in the very beginning there, it doesn't matter if you're way in the backcountry or if you're just base camping. This is the kind of stuff that is just the information that you need to make sure you're safe and you know what to do in case of an emergency or just an injury. The one thing that we didn't talk about that he wanted me to bring up prior to getting this episode out is talking about having some super glue to kind of patch up a wound. That is something that is viable and should be in your pack. Some kind of super glue for those wounds. I always carry this stuff called zip stitch. But that's only going to work if it's a straight laceration. It's most of these lacerations are going to be they're not going to be straight. They're going to be jagged. They're going to be weird shapes or whatever. And that zip stitch stuff isn't going to work super great on that. Where super glue can, and it's great to have in a pinch. And that's basically what I would recommend and what Jimmy recommends. And this week's guest, his name, I didn't even introduce him. Man, I didn't bring my A game. But his name is Jimmy Gruenewald. And Jimmy is a Special Forces combat medic who has spent a lot of time in combat zones, and he kind of brought that expertise that he learned in the service home as a civilian and has created something called Orion Medical Consulting. And I'm going to put the website in the show notes, and you can get what is called an outdoor first aid kit, or what it's going to be known in the future as a Jimmy Kit. And this is a really practical, very pragmatic first aid kit for you guys to keep in your packs. And Jimmy goes to all the elk-shaped camps with Dan Staton, and he's the guy they dub for all the medical first aid, kind of stuff, part of that class and that course. And we talk a little bit about that within the episode, so I won't get too much into that. The point is, Jimmy knows his stuff, and he came highly, highly recommended from more than one person to come on this show. He is a very down-to-earth, great dude, lots of credibility on this subject matter. And I mean, if you can go to either Iraq or Afghanistan 6 or 7 different times, which he did, and spend as much time as he did patching people up in a combat zone, he's the right guy to give you the right kind of advice in case you're out in the field and you break your ankle on some deadfall, or you cut your arm open, gutting a deer or something. That's the kind of stuff we're going to be talking about. And this is a super important conversation, and I think it's one of the most important ones we've done. So on that note, when I told you I put the website, his website. Sorry, I'm trying to read his website as I'm talking here. It's not working. I'm going to put his website in the show notes here. And he has given us a discount code for you guys if you want to order one of the Jimmy kits, one of the first aid kits. The promo code is Huntsman21, make sure you use that. Again, that's not like some formal sponsor for the show either. I always like to clarify that. I'm not getting a commission if you guys do that. It's just like Batum 907. They're super nice, and he was super nice and nice enough to give us this promo code that saves you guys some money, and it's just strictly for that benefit of our listeners here at the show. So jump on there if you guys are interested in getting this kit. I'm buying one because I think it's like just the most practical kit I've ever seen, and it's going to go a long way. So before we get there, I want to tell you guys, I made a post yesterday on our social media sites and stuff, and I want to talk about that for just a minute because for many of you, you know, I went and set my first bear bait barrel setup ever. I've never done it before. I've never baited bears, and so I know nothing about it. And when I went a couple days ago to go check the bait, and I was super stealthy going in because I wasn't sure, you know, if there's going to be a barrel or a bear on the barrel or anything like that. So I'm sneaking in there. And how I set this up is I've got like this nest of rocks that give me a really good hiding spot. So I don't have to like drag a blind or a stand in there. And I just set it up in this spot where I can look down on this barrel where I got the bait at. And I have, you know, a lot of friends that have set barrels out there, and they're trying to bait these bears and stuff. And they've been out there for like a month, and they don't have any bears, or maybe they've had one or two bears coming in. And so I didn't have a lot of expectations because again, these guys, they know more about it than I do. But what I did is I applied a lot of the knowledge that I've learned from talking to some of the other guests out there on the show, and just people basically out there that have a lot more experience in this whole bear baiting world than I do, because it's, you know, one of those things. If you're not an expert, well, I'll circle back to that. So I'm sneaking up, and I come around where the rocks are. I told you I had that little rock. It's like a nest up there. I can sit in there and hide in the rocks, and it's perfect for thermals and stuff. I come around the rock and I see something dark down by the barrel, and I'm like, "What is that?" And it's kind of moving, and I thought, "Okay, that's a bear." And I take another step, and I step on a dry stick, of course, and the bear looks up at me, and it's a black bear, pretty decent size, not like a terror. Like I would have shot it, but he heard me snap that stick and turn around and boogied right down into the drainage where I knew that I was going to be pulling him out of. Then I checked the camera after, and I mean, I've had bears there within 24 hours after setting my bait barrel. I've had bears there every day, like multiple times a day. From what I could tell, I've got like 7 different bears coming in. Haven't seen any cubs. Like, it's all sows and boar that are coming in on this barrel, checking it out, and they pulled my scent ball down from Batum 907, and also they were like playing tug of war with it. They actually climbed up in the tree and somehow got this thing out of the tree, which I was like, okay, I got this thing set perfect, man. They're not going to be able to get it. Nope, they got it. And so it's just an interesting thing. It's an interesting concept, this whole baiting thing. And the if anybody thinks baiting is easy, you haven't done it. It's a lot of freaking work. I mean, it is a lot of work, and it doesn't always work. But what I wanted to just kind of describe for you guys is when you are somebody that doesn't know anything about this particular aspect of hunting, right? Like for me, for bear baiting. So I'm 40 years old. I have been hunting since long before I was even legal to hunt in terms of having a tag, because I would go out when I was 4 and 5 years old with my dad. And that's how long I've been hunting. And so you would think that, okay, here's a dude, you know, he's been out there hunting for like 35 years. Can't teach an old dog new tricks, whatever. Don't let your ego get in the way of that. And because I've been guilty of that, where it's like, how am I going to learn anything from somebody else? You know, I've been doing this and I've been doing that and notched this many tags and blah, blah, blah. But I'm like an open book with this. If I don't know anything about a certain topic in terms of hunting and my experience and my success levels and all that kind of stuff, I'm like brutally honest about it. And you guys know, if you've listened to this show, I am not the world's best hunter. And that's not the point of my podcast. My podcast, I didn't start it because I'm this expert hunter that is going to offer all this wisdom to people. No, quite the opposite. I am an okay hunter at some things, and I bring in experts that are really good. And I take that information and I apply it in the field. I don't let my ego get in my way. I don't let my experience level get in the way or my age get in the way. I take from, and I don't care who it is, if they know more about the topic, I soak that information up. And that's where it gets important. Don't be afraid to learn from people. And don't be afraid to soak in the knowledge and apply things that you may think you know, but maybe you don't. And that's what I said in that post. Like, everybody wants to be a hunting expert before they're actual hunting experts. And I am no expert with any. I mean, I'm not even an expert at making podcasts, man. So the point is just always keep your mind open and yourself open to new information and new friends and new advice and pieces of wisdom and these educational nuggets that come out of a lot of this stuff. Because for me, a guy that's never set a bear bait goes up there, and I took all that information that I've been learning and working on, and I applied it. I didn't second guess their experience or expertise. I applied it the way that they told me to do it. And that's why I have 7+ bears coming into my bait site every single day. And I can be picky as I go out this weekend and hunt bears. That's the moral of the story. It was kind of a long-winded way to get to it, but that's kind of the gist, the message I wanted to leave you guys with before I bring the guest in for this week is just always be open to learning, and you will be surprised as to what you pick up and what the information that you retain, and sometimes you'll just be surprised with who you learned it from, and that's an important thing. So again, to all the guests out there in the past and friends I've made out of the podcast and the conversations we've had, thank you guys that are willing to share your knowledge and help people like me go above just not knowing what we're doing, right? Thank you for sharing your knowledge and letting me learn and everybody in this audience learn. And many of you listening in this audience could school me on a lot of different things. And so that's what I love about doing this is, as I've said it a million times, I, Jim Huntsman, am not the Western Huntsman. The Western Huntsman is a logo and a platform for collective Western hunters. And we are all Western huntsmen, right? We hunt the West. And that's the point of this. And I've learned so much from doing this. And I encourage you guys out there listening to be open-minded and try to learn and don't try to be experts before you're not an expert. And that's it. That's it. I think that's a really good lesson. So, with that lesson out of the way, let's get into it with Jimmy. Like I said, Jimmy Gruenewald, he's got a company called Orion Medical Consulting, and he's got this really badass first aid kit for hunters. It's designed specifically for hunters. And whether you're hunting out west or you're hunting, somewhere back east or whatever, if you're in the field, this is the kind of kit you're going to want to have in case you get yourself in a pickle. And Jimmy was kind enough to give us the discount code, and that's Huntsman21. That gives you free shipping on this product. It's actually a really good deal for this caliber of a kit. And what it does is it decomplicates it. It simplifies what you need in a first aid kit, what's important, things that have multiple uses, and things that you're most likely to need in the field. We're going to get into all that. So without further ado, guys, give it up for my good friend Jimmy. He's a great dude. You guys are going to really like him. I know I say that a lot. I know. But he's a legitimate American hero. He will motivate you. He will inspire you. And let's give it up for my good friend Jimmy. And here we go. Guys, buckle up. This week, I've got my buddy Jimmy Gruenewald, and we are going to be. This is going to be a great episode. I'm really excited about this one. Jimmy is one of those guys that has a background in a lot of the medical side, and Jimmy, you're going to be able to explain this a lot better than I can because I purposely didn't learn too much about you. So that I can dig all the information out of you during this episode, and really looking forward to it, man. I appreciate you coming on. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you very much, Jim. Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this as well. I'm a longtime listener of the podcast, so this is great.
Man, that's awesome, man. I always like hearing that. It's you never know who's out there listening, so sometimes it's cool to hear some of the feedback like that. But first things first. Did I pronounce your last name right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. So I want to tell people how this episode came about, and what happened, how kind of we got connected here, because you're in Wisconsin, right?
Yep, that is correct.
Okay, and so I was listening to the Elk Shape podcast with Dan Staton, and he had Dirk Durham on, and they were talking about you and your first aid kit, your outdoor first aid kit that they call they've called it the Jimmy kit, and it was super intriguing. So I'm like, okay, I texted Dirk. And he's like, oh, man, yeah, you got to get Jimmy on and talk about that thing. And so it sounds like what has happened is, so for anybody that doesn't know, Dan Staton with Elk Shape does something called the Elk Shape Boot Camp. Is that what he calls it, the boot camp, or is it Elk Shape Camp? Elk Camp.
He just calls it a Elk Shape Camp.
Elk Shape Camp. And this is a thing that Dan does where he does like 3 days where he has everybody come into this. It's like a seminar thing, and it's brings in all sorts of experts like you, Jimmy. He brings in Dirk Durham. He brings in like Joel Turner and all these folks that come in, and it's like this big whole. It's beyond Elk 101 kind of stuff. It is like really dialed in. He talks about fitness and shooting and bow setups and calling and I mean everything. And it's a great camp. And that's how you kind of got linked up with him. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. So I actually found Dan via the internet because I actually downloaded one of his fitness programs, 90 Days to Freedom. And I was like, man, this guy really gets it. You know, I had a special operations background, so I was looking to get get my lungs back underneath me going out west, living in Wisconsin here where I'm about 300 feet above sea level. So, the mountains are much like the water. It's the great equalizer.
Mm-hmm.
And I found out about these elk shaped camps and I signed up to go to the one down in Texas. And I was like, hey, I'm coming down to this elk-shaped camp. I told him my background. I said, I'd love to come down while I'm there. And if you need somebody to talk medical first aid, I'd love to do it. And he said, absolutely, we want to have you down there. And the rest is history. I got to go down there. I got to teach, and I saw the product that Dan had where I was like, I mean, he's a type of person that just, you just gravitate towards him. He's got a big gravitational pull.
Yeah.
And he's just got that personality and really the mindset that really wants to empower you to really be a better version of yourself. And the team with him, Jeff Byam and Dirk Durham, who connected us, they're just a phenomenal group of individuals.
Dan is one of those guys that, because I don't ever tell people, oh, you need to follow this guy, you need to follow that lady, you need to do this, you need to do that, but in terms of, along those lines, if there was somebody I recommend, especially new elk hunters, to follow, it's Dan Staton. And because Dan is just, like you said, everybody gravitates to him. He's so engaging, and he's so humble about his background, and the dude is a straight up elk killing machine. And you'd never know it just by talking to him because he's not like super braggadocious about it, but he is a straight up elk killer, and he's super motivating. So that's a plug out there for if you guys listening have not checked out the Elk Shape platform and the Elk Shape boot or camps. I keep wanting to call them boot camp. The Elk Shape camps, you guys need to check it out. Like it's one of those kind of life altering kind of programs. And totally recommend that. So Jimmy, let's get back to you, and I want to talk about like your background. How'd you get into what you do now? And just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, where you grew up, and we'll get to the nuts and bolts of it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and I grew up as a whitetail hunter. So my grandpa got me into hunting, got me and my brother into hunting, and he really taught us a lot about land navigation and basically just dropping us off in the woods with a compass and teaching us how to do terrain association. Now we don't have a lot of mountains there and things like that in Wisconsin, but when I really learned a lot about land navigation and just, basic woodsmanship. Now, he was not a bow hunter per se. Never really bow hunted. My wife actually is the one that got me into bow hunting. Her and her dad, my father-in-law, they were big time archery shooters. And when I started dating her, he got me into shooting a bow, and I think my wife has regretted that ever since. So it's been, but yeah, so I went to college in Wisconsin at the University of Stevens Point, and I joined the military back in 2004. And I was originally going to be in the military to become a doctor. And when I was a 18-year-old kid, and they gave me the opportunity to go down and train with the Special Forces soldiers down at down at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And I went down there and basically was in the field with them for about 3.5 weeks. And I came out of that definitely a changed person, where I was like, I wanted to get to that place. And it wasn't just it was just the way I saw them carry themselves, the professionalism they had, the dedication to their craft that really drew me to that community. So long story short, I was like, okay, the best way I need to get there is to go to airborne school. So the next summer, as a 19-year-old cadet, I went down to Fort Benning, Georgia, and did my 5 jumps down there, and graduated airborne school.
Nice.
And yeah, so fast forward, I was getting ready to graduate, and then the troop surge hit in 2007, 2008. So they're like, hey, you're not going to go to med school, which I was totally fine with, because I was so thankful that, Uncle Sam was able to give me the training and to be able to, provide me with the education. It's the least. I was super stoked. I was like, all right, yep, no problem. They're like, have you thought about becoming a physician assistant? And, in the Army, a physician assistant, you're the head medical person for your battalion. So that's about 800 people that you're responsible for.
So how does that work? Because in the Marines, we had corpsmen, right, attached to each platoon. Yep. And so in the Army, in Special Forces, you guys have like a doc attached to each platoon or squad or whatever, and then they all kind of report to you as the battalion physician assistant?
So the way that it's structured in the Army is we'll have we'll have company senior medics, and then it's structured very similarly, where they'll have a company, and then they'll have company senior medics, and then all the medics will report to you. And, you're responsible for then all those individuals. And really, It's more of the training. And then, you may, for a deployment, you might have a doctor attached to you, but that's not always the case. So I graduated PA school. I think I was 23 when I graduated, and I went straight to the 80s. That's
young, man.
Yeah, so I was a kind of an experiment for the Army, because when they grew the Army like they did back in 2007, 2008, they needed more PAs to help fill those slots. So they said, hey, have you ever thought about becoming a PA? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. They're like, well, we're going to send you down to Fort Sam Houston. Was down there, did all my clinical, your academic year. And then after when I was down there, I got to pick where I wanted to go for my clinical rotations. And I knew I wanted to deploy right away. So I figured the best way to do that would be go back to Fort Bragg and go to the center of the universe and work as hard as I can. So I went there and really just drank from the fire hose for about a year. And then as soon as I graduated, I was off to the 82nd Airborne Division, 4th Brigade Combat Team, 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment. And I got everything I asked for. It was great. I really enjoyed it. I got to do a lot of in the field work. And when I deployed, I got farmed out to a lot of the infantry companies that when they would go out and do patrols. So I got to go along right there with them. And
wow,
it was the best. I was very fortunate to be surrounded by just mountains of men and women that cared about what they did and really looked after me to make sure that I was always in the right place and doing the right thing. So it was a great experience. And one of the things I found when I was doing that is when you're out there, like with a lot of people don't realize like how much extra gear you carry. Like I only weigh about maybe at the time I was probably like $170. And with all my gear on, I weighed close to 289 pounds.
Yeah.
With ammo, everything else. And I was having to carry my medical kit on top of that. So I started to get really selective on what I was carrying. It's because you start to find out after you start treating a number of casualties, what you really used and what really mattered.
Yeah.
Because and then you start dumping that, I actually have a picture that I show people of me on my first combat mission. I'm like tacticooled out. Like I have all these pockets and everything and all these little pouches. And then I have a picture of me on my last deployment, my last combat mission. And it's just like my plate carrier is just slick. I just have ammo and a couple tourniquets and that's it. Everything else is just ammo.
That's a great point. I'm glad you talked about that, man, because it's something I've talked about on the show in the past with, it's cool having a military guy on. I always get a kick out of not that I'm making fun of anybody, right? But when people kind of get a little braggy about they're carrying 35 pounds this many miles, and it always takes me back to, you take a time in Iraq when 30 pounds was my flak jacket, right?
Right. Exactly.
Those plates that go into the flak jacket, and I'm humping all this ammo into there, and the shittiest pack you can imagine, stuffed to the brim, the shittiest set of boots you can imagine, and we're not going 10 miles, we're going 30 miles, and so it's always one of those things I think about when, again, it's not like I'm looking down on anybody for that kind of stuff, but being super braggadocious about how tough somebody is carrying 30 pounds up a mountain has never gone 30 miles in Iraq. And
exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's the one thing that the military does is it gives you just great perspective,
sure.
no matter what the situation is. And it was a great time for me, a great place to grow up in the 82nd. I had great commanders. And when I was on that first deployment, I was like, okay, I want to go to special operations. So being a new PA, I had a deployment under my belt. So that was kind of the first gatekeeper to be able to apply. And I applied to the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, or the 160th SOAR out of Fort Campbell, and was fortunate enough to be invited for an assessment and was blessed to have passed that assessment. And then from there, I went into about a year and a half long training pipeline where I got to focus more on the critical care medicine. So the 160th job, we're the ones that are dropping off those special operations units. We're the ones that are bringing them to the target, and it's our motto: plus or minus 30 seconds. If we drop you in there, we're coming to get you out, regardless of what's going on. And the men and women that serve there are just phenomenal groups of people, and it really I'd never worked so hard to be mediocre. It was like the people there. I was like, wow, I am just I remember half the time during my training, I would just call my wife, and we just had our second son was just born. And I was like, hey, don't unpack anything. I'm going to get fired, just because it's just, there's no way that I'm going to be able to keep this up. And I just had really great instructors. And what was nice about that experience is, we would go to some of these austere environments, and you're the head person in charge. When you get to that level, they expect it's an implied task that you know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And you're responsible for everything that goes on medically. So when they, show up, it's not just about treating trauma patients, but treating sick call patients. Hey, do we have to worry about malaria? Are there any crazy, health things going on, COVID being one of them.
Sure.
You're directly responsible for that. So it really got me tuned in to being able to really refine the equipment and the gear that I'm bringing. So, and it was great. I did a total of 6 deployments total, and then I hit my 2-year mark.
Man, 6?
Yep, 6 deployments. It was a lot of fun. My wife had to do the hard job. I got to do all the fun stuff, and she was back home holding down the fort, with 2 boys, and she had the toughest job. So
how'd you meet your wife?
So we actually went to high school together. She lived across the street from me, and I actually was her donor aide at a blood bank in high school, and that's how I met her.
Oh, cool.
There was some guy that was actually ahead of me that was going to take her, be her donor aide, and I was like, I knew I wanted to talk to her, so I was like, hey man, so and so needs to talk to you. and then I just totally took his spot. So
I like it, man. You go after it.
That's right. And then my wife just says over the years, I just kind of just wore her down after a long game of attrition, and then she had no choice but to say yes. So.
Finally, she succumbed, man. That's how it happens.
That's right.
It must be a thing for dudes named Jim or Jimmy or something, man. Because I had to kind of do the same thing with my wife. It took she turned me down like 6 times before she finally said yes to me taking her on a date. So
that's awesome.
Interesting. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, so I was at my 10-year mark at the 160th, and you get that spot in the military where it's like, okay, you're not going to be getting to do the fun things anymore, and you're going to have to get more, doing more administrative tasks. And I was still pretty young at that point. I was like 32, so I was like, I feel like I have a lot more to give on the operational side, and I really enjoyed teaching. So, I made the leap of faith where I was like, I'm gonna walk away, and I transitioned over to the National Guard, and I left, the dream job I had, and didn't really know what I was getting myself into. So I basically did a 180 and plunged full-fledged into the civilian ER, where I work at a level 2 trauma center and a critical access hospital in northern Wisconsin, where I'm serving as the sole medical provider for the entire hospital. And it's a totally different world. I went from, plugging holes and putting tourniquets on, and to, heart attacks and strokes. And it's like, oh man, this is a total game changer for me.
Wow.
And I was just very fortunate to have a really good group of docs that I work with that, were patient with me and really trained me up. And that's been the constant theme of my underperformance, is that I'm just blessed to be surrounded by people that care, and they're like, hey man, you should probably just correct your azimuth a little bit here. So
okay, so I'm starting to see why Dirk was so adamant about how cool it would be to get you on the show, because you're a super humble guy, but you've got a badass history. I mean, that is badass stuff. 6 deployments, dude. And that for folks that don't understand the magnitude of what just one deployment can do to your life, 6 is just incredible. And I appreciate the fact that you are willing to do that, and that you're humbled by it, and you've just got this grace about you that I think we need more of in this country. So thanks for that, man. That's a killer background. I think we've definitely set up some credibility on what we're talking about.
Well, and that's the thing where I came from. I mean, it was just I had guys that were training me that were in, at Roberts Ridge and at Mogadishu in Somalia. So, and they were just passing those life lessons down to us. So now I feel like, I owe it to them to pay it forward, because, that's the only thing after, that when they got done training me, it's like, man, that was life-changing. How do I don't, saying thank you isn't, they're like, nope, it's your job to train the next generation. So however I can do that. And this has just been a great platform for me, in the hunting community that I didn't really know existed until I started to get into Western hunting myself. And it's been phenomenal.
And so tell us a little bit about that with Western hunting. You when you get out of the military, did you just kind of have this, because you'd always been a whitetail hunter, you just get a hankering to come out west and chase an elk or mule deer or something?
Yeah. So how it got started is I struggled pretty hard after getting out. It's kind of one of those things where the merry-go-round stops, and I just it's one of those ones where I feel like I wasn't contributing something to something greater than myself. I wasn't part of that team anymore, and I didn't have a mission anymore. And that was the big thing. It's like I always talk to vets that are getting out, it's like, hey, you have to find your mission and go for it. Can
we talk about that for a minute, and we'll come back
Absolutely.
to the Western hunting? Because that's something that I don't think gets enough attention. And because I struggled when I got out of the military as well, and I think a lot of people do. What was the hardest thing for you? Was it the lack of mission? Was it the lifestyle? Like what was the most difficult thing for you transitioning from 10 years of military service to civilian all of a sudden?
A You hit it right on the head with the lack of mission. You went to being like, I felt like I was this integral part, and you felt like you had to be, my biggest fear when I was in it, I know 110% it was the same for you. It wasn't about getting hurt. It was about, I am going to not be able to do my job, and it's going to let my team down, and somebody else is going to get hurt because my inability to do my job. And that's where I just didn't have that purpose anymore, because it was, I transitioned, and it's like, okay, this is my, you go to your hospital and it's great. You take care of patients, and I love that, but it wasn't that same connection that you had with the guys, and it wasn't that same, not everybody has that same dedication to duty and the mission. So it's like, oh man, this is a huge paradigm shift. And
it is.
I really, and my wife actually was like, hey, why don't you just get back into hunting? Why don't you just go and get back into bow hunting again? And I know she's definitely regretting that now, especially with all the equipment that's now sitting in the garage. But it was just, she's like, you need to get back into hunting. So I started to get back into whitetail hunting, and I really enjoyed it. And then I just was like, I want to go out west. I want to go.
Did that kind of help foster a sense of mission, or like a sense of purpose after? Because I just want to touch on this real quick. Like, again, I don't think it gets enough attention. For in my circumstance, the Iraq War started the exact week that I was supposed to EAS and get out of the Marines, right? And instead of coming home and getting out, they sent us to Iraq. And so because of that, when we got home from Iraq, we were all stop lost, right? We get home from Iraq, and they transitioned us out of the military as fast as possible. So basically what happened was we went from like combat Iraq to civilian within like anywhere from a 4 to 6 week time period, depending on how quickly they processed you out. And I found myself back home all of a sudden surrounded by people that were complaining and bitching about how many hours they worked at Taco Bell, and moving slowly through the grocery store, and just everybody's got their own self-serving purpose. And that not saying that that's right or wrong, but I had this weird feeling that I didn't belong, right? And it was a lot more painful and difficult than I let on. And I just, for somebody like you could probably offer anybody who's listening, who's transitioning to the civilian world, if I could get my words out right, what kind of words of advice or encouragement would you have to somebody that might be struggling with that transition?
Absolutely. The first thing is that you're not alone. That's the hardest part, right? Because you experience that. And I will say that's the one thing that I think the military has really improved upon, is that transition period. Because it used to be what your story was. I mean, that was it. Guys would get back and they'd be like, okay, 5 to 6 weeks later, bam, you're out on the streets again. And trying to just get back into society again. I mean, I would have this period when I would come back where my wife called it, she's like, oh, your life without margins right now, where it'd be like, yeah, hey, I'm going to go buy a truck, and it's like, you just have these, just in your, like you said, like it's just perspective on things. Like when I hear people complain about things now, I'm like, okay, well, I'm not having a pack on my back. Nobody's shooting at me.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is like an okay day. But I think the hardest part, what you said, is just that feeling of isolationism, where you're sitting there, you're like, I feel like I can't connect with anybody. I don't know what I'm doing as far as like, how am I contributing to something? I think that's where hunting and the outdoors can really fill that void and have that connectedness with other veterans. That, in just my experience, I've met so many other vets that have been through similar situations, and just getting back into, and it's not the sense of going out and killing an animal or anything like that. That's not it. It's the whole process behind it. It's the preparation, the attention to detail.
It's the sense of purpose.
Yes.
It's this purpose that is, Sure, it provides an adventure, right? Because like you said, nobody's
Right.
shooting at you anymore. Nobody's doing this. You're not in the middle of the desert drinking your IV bag because your water truck got blown up, right?
Right.
And that's a true story.
Oh man.
It tasted like shit. Anyway, you have this. It gives you this sense of peace and purpose, and a way to maybe relate to people that hadn't been in your shoes, and so
Right.
like I can't relate to this individual who just has never been there, but since he's a hunter, I can now become I could like relate to him, and we can have this connection that I was so desperate for, because when you're in the service, you've got all these people around you that you all have the same mission. You have this connection. You know who farted by the way it smells, right? That's how close you are to these people. And
exactly.
Yeah, I've never really had that conversation on this show, so it's interesting. I don't mean to get us off topic, but no, I appreciate your perspective.
Absolutely, and I think that's one thing that I'd love to help out in the veteran community is getting more vets involved in hunting. I think that it serves a great purpose, and I think the more we can get them involved in not just hunting, but in public lands and everything else, get them. It's just going to benefit everybody.
Yep. For sure, man. I appreciate all that. That's great stuff. I could keep that conversation going for like 2 more hours. So let's.
Same here.
Let's transition back to. I think maybe in the future we should maybe revisit that conversation or for an episode. I think that'd be kind of cool. But
that would be awesome.
So you come out west and start hunting.
Yeah, so my brother and I, who's also a veteran, he was a combat medic that served in 1st Cavalry Division. He actually was in Iraq. He came home from Iraq right when I was going to Afghanistan. So
wow.
Your
poor mom.
Hunter. Right? Yeah, so nobody in my family was ever military before my brother and myself, and my sister, her husband, who also went as our hunting partner, he was in the Navy. So it's like we now have become this military family.
Cool, man.
So
that's awesome.
Yeah. But my brother and I, we were like, hey, I was like, hey, I want to go out west. Let's go out west. Let's do, the way the schedule worked. We ended up going out to Idaho for a mule deer, and I got a B tag for antlerless elk.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, it was great experience. I mean, we were into muleys every day. Unfortunately, we didn't get anything, but it was a very humbling experience too.
Mm-hmm.
And just going out there and just trying to transition from, and after going to Dan's elk shape camp, it's like, oh, cool, I did everything wrong. Okay, awesome. Like everything you're not supposed to do, but it was great because we got to go out there. We got to carry heavy packs on our back. And one of the things that I found which kind of got us into these aid kits was I was looking for, what type of aid kit I should take out west. Because I had all my tactical things, but I was like, all right, thinking about injury patterns. I'm like, well, I'm going to see if there's anyone out there. And I couldn't find an aid kit that fit the bill. It was either a bunch of stuff that you really didn't need, a bunch of these little bandages and antibiotic ointments where it's like, that's not really going to do anything for you. And my wife was like, you should just make your own kit.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, just kind of put it in the back of my mind. And what part of that, when I was teaching down at Elk Shape, I was like, here's what I would put in my aid kit. Boom, 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 boom. And just listed out the items. And, they're like, why don't you make your own aid kit? So I was like, oh, my wife told me the same thing. So that's where it got started. And, I was just looking when I was down the gear rabbit hole of like, okay, here's what you have in your pack. And they'd do this big pack dump, and they'd have, I was watching YouTube, and guys would be like, I wear this type of pant, I wear this base layer, I have this, food, and they would get all into it. And then they just pick up their aid kit and be like, yep, here's my first aid kit. I'm like, well, that's not really big. What do you got in there? And then I was like, you know what, maybe this is something, because I was always looking for, like, the hunting community was such a big, just relief for me, like from a mental health perspective. I was like, I want to give back to the way that the hunting community really helped me. And then I was like, okay, here it is. Maybe this is the one where I sure as heck can't give you anything as far as hunting knowledge goes, because I'm definitely not there. But what I can do is I know medicine. Mm-hmm. And I started to think, okay, if I was going into the woods, what would I want, my family to carry? because they might be the ones actually treating me. So we just made up I think the best thing, if you had to carry one piece of kit with you into the woods, it would be a tourniquet. Absolutely. Hands down, 100%.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, I used to, when I would assess docs, PAs, and medics that were coming into the special operations community, and I would always ask them a question like, hey, if you had to bring two pieces of gear to the next war, what would they be and why? And if their first one wasn't a gun, then we had a different conversation. But it was always like, a gun and a tourniquet, I think is really the biggest, I think that's one of the things that a lot of guys and gals out there, they always think like, yeah, that's not going to happen to me. Well, you know what? When you enter the mountains, you enter the food chain.
Yep.
Like you are not the apex predator, and it's not necessarily meaning it's a bear or a mountain lion, but you could slip off the side of a ravine. I've seen guys slice their hands, slice their legs on broadheads. It happens so quick.
And there's so many things that can happen. Like the mountain is the apex predator. It doesn't matter what's living out there. It's the mountain itself, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, a lot of folks think like, wow, that's a little bit extreme. It's like, you can bleed out, like completely exsanguinate in about 2 to 3 minutes. Mm-hmm. So, that's great that you have a Garmin inReach and you can hit the SOS button, but a helicopter, the skies aren't just going to part and a helicopter is going to appear. It may take several hours in order for rescue services to get to you.
It most likely will take several hours.
Yeah. And that's where it's like, hey, if we can, our big thing is we want to help educate and empower hunters, just like, getting there, going and stalking that animal, give them the confidence that, hey, if I get hurt or my partner gets hurt, I can treat them and get them off the mountain.
If you're anything like me, hunting is a year-round thing for you, and we're always thinking about how to make our next upcoming season a little bit better, and one way to do that is with gear. And you guys know I'm not a big gear junkie, but I do have some important gear items that I'm always a huge fan of, and they're right here available on this show. Let's talk about Scree gear. Scree is my go-to camo. Scree is high-performance hunting attire and gear, scientifically tested camo patterns, and all backed by a great company, and I wouldn't recommend it to you if I didn't truly believe in the Scree product. They've got a complete layering system for all terrain and conditions, gear designed to adapt to the weather. It's rugged gear. It's got a lifetime warranty, VIP sizing and exchange program. You can't go wrong with Scree. Get the best out there without breaking the bank, and to make it even better, use promo code The Western Huntsman for 15% off and free shipping. Hell of a deal. Check it out at ScreeGear.com. Next on the list is my oldest and fondest sponsor of the show is Phelps Game Calls. One thing I love about companies like Phelps Game Calls is the American success story that came out of it. And Phelps started in Jason Phelps' garage years ago, and it's now one of the premier hunting call companies on the market, and I wouldn't point you in that direction if I didn't feel like they were the best calls available. Jump on PhelpsGameCalls.com. When you find a call you like, use promo code Huntsman10 for 10% off. I promise you, you will not regret it. Hoffman Boots. Hoffman Boots is a go-to boot company I've been using for years and years and years. And the cool thing about it is I'm only on my second pair of Hoffman Explorers. I put lots of miles on my Hoffman Explorers. They're a great boot. They're not going to cost you a small fortune to get. And they have all the same guarantees and warranties that every other company out there has. If you want to be confident, guys, do not skimp on boots. Go to HoffmanBoots.com. Get you a pair of, for me, I like the 8-inch Explorers, but they also have the 6-inch. They have all sorts of different options. Check it out at HoffmanBoots.com and use promo code Huntsman10, all caps lock, for 10% off. And last but not least is Tacticam. Are you interested in filming your hunt? And are you interested in helping with conservation efforts throughout the North American continent? Well, then I got a deal for you. Tacticam is a point-of-view type kind of camera that records in 4G. They also have other products like the Film Through Scope, the FTS, and you attach that to your rifle scope and you can film your shot right there. and they have the mounts for your shoulder, for your head. You can mount it to your bow, you can mount it to wherever and whatever you want. Lots of versatility with the Tacticam. Other products include, but are not limited to, the fisheye camera. The Tacticam Spotter LR is definitely worth a look if you want to film what you're seeing through your glass while you're actively hunting and get it on camera. It's a great thing. But I think that the thing that I'm most excited about with Tacticam this year is the new Reveal cell cam that is coming out. This trail camera will send you images in real time as they're coming in. They've got like an enhanced antenna for better service. If you're like managing property or something like that, or you've got a bear bait set up somewhere that you have phone service, you can get those pictures right there to your phone. This cell cam is super, super cool. I'm really excited about it. And you can get all this at the westernhuntsman.com/gear. Go to the gear shop. You'll find all the Tacticam stuff right there. Best pricing out there on it. And what happens is we split the profitable revenue from these sales of the Tacticam gear, and half of it goes to conservation efforts, which vary depending on what quarter of the year it is. Right now we're raising money and trying to get some money over to Sportsman's Alliance. It's a great cause, and that is what's going to go down when you shop for Tacticam gear at thewesternhuntsman.com. So go over there and check it out and get you a camera. Guys, let's get back into it. I sure appreciate it. Yeah. No, that's great, man. And that kind of brings us to your company and what you and your wife have started with this, and kind of what I want to get into, because let's break it down a little bit. You've got all sorts of things that can happen on the mountain, and there's going to be different things that happen depending on what region of the country you're in, right? So, if you're in kind of the Southwest, you really got to think about rattlesnakes. If you're in my neck of the woods or Wyoming or somewhere, you really got to think about grizzly bears. There's just different things, but I mean, those are the obvious things. It's also you just slipped on some deadfall and sliced your arm open kind of situation, which has happened to me. Or you're opening, of course, I'm going to use like Peak Refuel as an example, but they make it really easy to open. But let's say it's not, and you're using your pocket knife and you slice your leg. It's those kind of things that I think a lot of people take for granted in terms of not taking into account as a risk. I one time I almost poked my eye clean out of my head one time because I was watching to the right and to the left as I pointed my head back forward where I'm walking down this trail. This sharp stick was pointed off of this tree and got me right in the middle of the eye. And you know what I think saved me is I was wearing a contact. And I think absolutely, yeah. It stopped it from scratching my eye up really bad. So anyway, what else? What do you think? Kind of along those lines, what do you think there's dangers and threats and things like that, injury wise, that you think maybe hunters don't think about a lot?
Yeah, so you hit the big one on the head there too. Is just cuts, lacerations, grabbing a broadhead, or slicing your hand open, but also sprains and strains. Those are going to be things like, think about how much time and effort and money you've spent into planning a hunt, only to step off a deadfall and all of a sudden now your ankle is sprained, and you can't. Not just that, now it's not even if you can continue hunting. But let's say you're 5 miles from your truck. Mm-hmm. How are you going to get back there? And what are you going to use to help to stabilize? Everybody has this, illusion in their mind that they're just going to MacGyver some sort of splint. And I can tell you from personal experience that, you're not going to rise to the occasion. You're just going to fall to the level of your training.
Yeah.
And
yeah, great point.
And where I'd like to see is I always tell this when people ask about hey, when they do concealed carry and they're like, hey, what kind of gun should I get? Blah, blah, blah. I always think about what's your first aid? Do you carry a tourniquet? Because if you're carrying a gun, you should probably carry a tourniquet too. Mm-hmm. And that's where it's trying to change that thought process a little bit about self-preservation, that being able to, be a protector and being able to take care of yourself if you're injured. So I think, hemorrhage is the big thing. So bleeding, so a tourniquet. Then you also got to think too, sprains and strains. So like with our kit, we actually have a splint in there that's 36 inches that can be moldable. And then we also have an ace wrap, a 6-inch ace wrap that's got some Velcro to it. So you can actually use that to secure the splint. And we also have 100 feet of duct tape in there too. I think duct tape works really well. I've actually used that to help almost do a wrap if individuals sprain their ankle, because a lot of people, as soon as they sprain their ankle, they want to take their foot out of their boot and take a look at it. And it's like, no, it's best to leave it in there until you can actually get back to your truck or get to a hospital. But we actually show like how to use duct tape to kind of wrap your ankle in your boot to be able to effectively get off the mountain. We actually had to do that. We did that with one of our medical folks that got injured when we were training in Norway. And we were like 4 miles out from where we needed to go, and he sprained his ankle really bad. We actually just used this duct tape, made almost a makeshift splint out of duct tape, and he was still able to complete the rest of the training evolution. So it really works. Nice. Yeah. And so one of the big things too, like the equipment that we have, like everything that we have in our kit, I've used on a real world casualty. So that's why I was so specific on the type of kit that I had, and the equipment is it had to be small, it had to be compact, and it had to have a purpose.
Okay.
Most times it needed to have at least 2 purposes.
And we need to back up just a minute and talk about, you started Orion Medical Consulting, right?
Yep.
And it's you and your wife. And Dirk and Dan Staten, they dubbed this thing the Jimmy Kit, but really what it's called is the Outdoor First Aid Kit.
That is correct. Yes.
And I'm looking at it, and I just pulled it up online. Website for you guys listening, orionmedical.org. And you just go to the products, the Outdoor First Aid Kit. But there's a combat tourniquet application. There's compressed gauze, elastic wrap. Then I scroll down here, moleskin, NAR emergency trauma dressing. What is that, like a wet wipe kind of thing?
No, so that's actually like it's a flat battle dressing. So similar to and instead of being rolled up, it's flat, it's compact. So it has a gauze, and you basically put the gauze towards the wound, and then you just wrap it just like you would an ace wrap, and it actually has a self-adhering some Velcro that it secures it itself.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay, so the packaging, it looks like a wet wipe thing. So I'm glad you explained that, because I would have been confused there. But and then you've got like you said, the duct tape, reinforcement tape, and the SAM splint, 36-inch moldable SAM splint, and that's it. And what does it weigh?
It weighs a total of 1 pound, 1 ounce.
See, and that is one of the things that I've always had issues with like finding the right kind of first aid kit. Even the ones that are like, oh, this is a backpacker's first aid kit. Well, it's got all this stuff in there that I'll never use, first of all, and second of all, they're usually kind of heavy, and so I did kind of what you did in terms of making my own little kit, but the difference is you actually know what you're doing. Actually, so I took EMT. I was an EMT. But I never did it as a job. I just went to the EMT school, but very basic stuff, and so that was, a good 18 years ago or so. So I have no idea. Don't remember any of that. Clearly the certification is expired. But tell us a little bit about this kit, what your thought process is behind everything in it, and so that it kind of just comes together.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at this kit, I had the same mindset as you. Is like I went out and bought a bunch of these kits that were on the market and just kind of looked through them, and it's really overwhelming. Like you open up one of these kits and it's like, holy cow, what are all, you give these people all these choices that it's just in the moment when your sympathetic nervous system is in overdrive, you are going to resort to muscle memory. So that's where it's like, if you have fewer items to choose from, we want to make sure that these items are, 1, the minimum that you need, and 2, that are going to be effective in saving your life. So the first one that I have is the tourniquet, the CAT tourniquet, which is the combat application tourniquet. And The reason we went with that one is its ease of use. This tourniquet can be applied single-handedly, and it's very simple to use. You just route the one end through the buckle, pull it all the way tight, and you just secure that with the turning knob, which is called the windlass, and you just turn it until you get the bleeding to stop.
Gotcha.
And it's actually the tourniquet that's used by the U.S. military and all their individual first aid kits. So it has a lot of data behind it through the Tactical Combat Casualty Care Review Committee. So it has a lot of data to support its effectiveness and its use.
Jimmy, can you tell us exactly from an actual professional, like, when is it time to use a tourniquet?
So a tourniquet should be utilized when you see this real, like, bright red, like, pulsatile bleeding where it's just squirting. That would be a good indication to use a tourniquet. Or if there's just a lot of blood where you're just like their entire pants leg or arm is completely soaked. You've tried to put a pressure dressing or a dressing on it. It's still bleeding through. That would be the time to apply a tourniquet. A lot of people, there's a lot of fear about using tourniquets because folks are worried that, if I use a tourniquet, they're going to lose their arm.
Yeah.
And that's where, like, organizations like Stop the Bleed are doing a really good job educating the public and its use of tourniquets. But realistically, you can leave a tourniquet on, in the upwards. I usually tell folks 2 to 3 hours. Typically, it's usually 4, but I always tell people, like, in the backcountry, hey, 2 hours. So that's a fair amount of time. Now, we've actually done studies where they've had them, on 4 hours where there's no degradation or loss of limb. But the scare, the fear factor was, okay, if you put a tourniquet on, they're gonna lose their leg or they're gonna lose their arm, and that's not the case. Now, obviously, if you leave it on too long, greater than 4 or 5 hours, yeah, you're probably going to have some damage there. But for most of us, I mean, you're going to be able to save that person's life.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, I'd rather lose my leg than die.
Yeah. Well, right. It's like if we're in the back country and you put a tourniquet on and I lose my leg, you're still going to get a Christmas card from me.
Yeah, exactly. So when you apply a tourniquet, and let's say you've got this big gash on just above your knee or something, somewhere on your leg or thigh or somewhere, and you put the tourniquet on, you stop the bleeding. What do you do with the actual wound to try to get out or try to wait for help or whatever? Does that make sense?
Yep, that's a great question. So just to back up a little bit, when you're putting that tourniquet on, you never want to go just above the wound. You want to go at least 2 inches higher, or I just tell folks in the heat of the moment to go, this was the training we used in the military, which is high and tight. So basically you just go as high up as you can go and put the tourniquet on, just because you want to stop that bleeding. Gotcha. And it can go over clothes. It's not a big deal. We'd like to get it skin on skin, but if you put it over there, it's okay. It's still going to be effective at stopping the bleed. So once you have that tourniquet on and that bright red bleeding has stopped, that's where you could utilize the gauze that we have and the flat bandage, and you can actually wrap that bandage around that wound to keep it covered to try to help prevent infection.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So you just cover it, take the gauze, and then the elastic wrap and kind of go around it.
Yep.
Okay. Cool. What else? We've got the combat tourniquet that is in there, and you've explained how to apply that and then cover the wound. I'm trying to think of like common injuries in the backcountry, or let's talk about spraining. Oh, go ahead. You had something there.
So let's say you brought up let's say you have an injury where you slice your hand and it's not a deep cut, but it's still bleeding pretty profusely. Mm-hmm. Nothing that really would necessitate a tourniquet. What you can actually do is the compress gauze that we have in our kit, you can actually open that up and you can cut a piece of that gauze off and actually put it over the wound. And then you can actually use the rest of that gauze to wrap around it. And you have a makeshift bandage too. So I think, cuts are one of those big ones that we always, that are bigger than like you couldn't use a Band-Aid for. And this is a great way where our dressings come into play.
Okay. And I'm really excited about talking about this splint, the SAM splint.
Oh, absolutely.
That
Yeah.
So just to put it into one thing that I want to address real quick for many of you listening, you're going to be a lot like me where most of the time you're hunting solo. And that's where I think a lot of hunters can get into trouble. I'm solo. I always say I'm solo probably 80 to 90% of the time. And so sometimes I'm several miles in by myself, and I always worry about that, especially because, I just turned 40. I'm getting a little bit older, getting a little bit more clumsy kind of thing. I want to make sure that I'm going to be okay, especially hunting solo where I'm not going to have any help. So tell us a little bit about the SAM splint, when to use it, and kind of what the application is.
Yeah, absolutely. So the SAM splint, when you get it, it actually comes folded up, and it's about, I'd say maybe about 10 inches in length. And it's pretty, when you get it, you unfold it, and it comes out, and it's pretty flat. It's maybe about 4 inches wide. And all you do is you can just bend the corners of it, and it turns it into a pretty rigid splint. And you can use this both for arm injuries as well as leg injuries. So a lot of times when folks, sprain their ankle, they're trying to get you've all heard the adage of like, oh, go get 2 sticks and, you can tie them together with your shirt. It's like, if you sprain your ankle bad enough, you're not going to be able to move around, try to find 2 sticks. This splint, you can actually basically just make it into like a U shape over the bottom of your foot and pull both sides up. And you can actually use either our flat bandage or that 6-inch ace wrap and actually wrap it around, and you have your own little makeshift splint for your lower extremity. And the reason go ahead, sorry.
Well, I want to, getting back to, we talked about when to use a tourniquet. When you're putting this SAM splint on, are you putting it like, let's say you roll your ankle, it's like starting to bruise up or whatever. You said to leave your boot on.
Yep.
And then where do you put the splint?
So you'd put the splint right over the top, right over your boot. Like you'd make it into almost like a U. So you'd make it a U and put your foot, put it right on the outside of your boot, right on the outside of your pant. And basically you're almost like stepping into the U, and you just use that ace wrap to help secure it. And now you have a makeshift splint that's providing pretty good support on either side of your ankle. And you're able to still walk on that if you can tolerate that, because it's not going to be providing you that back and forth motion. Gotcha.
Interesting. So, and then you're working on getting like a bag that this all comes in, like a pouch kind of thing you were talking about.
Yep. And then we're also oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, you go for it, man.
So we're actually coming out too with a video series. We're working with a production team that's going to come out with to have a bunch of how-to videos, so that way guys can view this, at their leisure. When they get their pack, they'll actually have a QR code that they can scan, and that gives them lifetime access to our video library, where they can see how to use the equipment, recommended packing lists. And then, we actually have a video of us showing you how to use the splint, how to apply it for like a lower extremity, like an ankle sprain to an arm fracture, how to make modified slings, tourniquet application. So they'll try to, as much as possible, like hands-on use on the equipment.
I think that's super important, man. The video series is going to be like, I will be a huge customer for that, because like I told you, I went to EMT school and actually was a certified EMT basic. But I don't remember any of that. Like, I don't remember any of that. I worry if I need to give somebody CPR today, I feel like I'm not prepared, and I need to kind of relearn all that. So the point being is stuff like that is when you get like a Jimmy kit or an outdoors first aid kit, are you going to like change the name officially to Jimmy kit, or are you going to?
I know it's, I really want it. We call it the Jimmy kit, but I'm always worried that from a standpoint of like, hey, when somebody gets hurt and they want to run to their, hey, go get my aid kit, and somebody's like, hey, go get my Jimmy kit. I don't.
Oh, yeah, in the heat of the moment. Yeah.
In the heat of the moment, yeah. That's what we were just talking about yesterday, actually.
I can see that being a problem. But the point I was making there is, like it's not like riding a bike with this kind of stuff. When we're talking about first aid and knowing how to apply all these different things, it's not like once you know it, you just kind of, are always going to know it. That's why, anybody in the medical field, they have to do like continued education all the time. And it's because I think that it's important that this stuff is always fresh in your mind. And so like for me, what I would do is prior to any hunting trip I'm going out on, for the first time in the year or whatever, I'm going to go through those videos like every year and just make sure I remember, because you got to remember, if let's say you're gutting an elk and the knife slips and you cut an artery on your leg and that thing is just pumping out blood, are you really going to have the state of mind to be like, oh, okay, I remember watching this video 5 years ago on how to apply this tourniquet, blah, blah, blah. No, it's going to be like super stressful. It's going to be, you're going to be, your nerves are going to be fried. And you just, like you said, go back to the training, and it has to be muscle memory, just like calling an elk. It's got to be muscle memory. And so what do you recommend to build that muscle memory? I know you've got the videos coming out, but is there something on top of that, whether you offer it or somebody else does or whatever, to kind of build this muscle memory so it's just kind of a, second nature to put a tourniquet on?
No, absolutely. So one of the other things that we're working with is trying to get out to as many of these hunting camps and trade shows, as well as, presentations where we can actually get folks with their hands on the equipment and show them actually how to use this in a real life scenario.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times for us, like in the special operations community, we don't have a top secret tourniquet. All we do is we're masters of the basics, and we just do the basics. We practice it until it's like, we used to do tourniquet drills in the dark where they'd actually blindfold you and you had to find it in your pack and put the tourniquet on. So you got that muscle memory down. Now, I'm not saying folks have to go to that level for, first aid kit, but, when they're practicing shooting, being like, okay, where are they putting their first aid kit in their packs? Are they burying it way at the bottom, or are they keeping it on the outside? Are they, so that way they know exactly, and showing people that if they're hunting with a group, hey, this is where my first aid kit is. It's right here. And that it's easily identifiable and very easy to access. Gotcha.
Are there any like misconceptions that you've noticed hunters or just, the general public, whatever, have about first aid that you'd like to put a squash to? Gosh, I'm trying to type here. I need to stop typing because I'm typing out my questions.
No, absolutely. We hit the big one right away, is that, tourniquets are extremely dangerous. They're not. They're very safe to use, and I think there should be more of them. I have a video actually of my, he was 5 at the time. I have him putting a tourniquet on my now 9-year-old son, and just showing him like, hey, this is very easy to use, and just making it more common practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where folks, some folks say like, hey, and there's folks out there that, hey, like, I'm not a blood person. Like, I do not want, that's not my thing. I enjoy hunting, but I just can't stand. That's fine. We want to help empower those individuals, even if it's just taking a basic first aid, a basic CPR class, just getting that confidence in just doing the reps, just like shooting your bow. I think that's really where, I think the medical community can really help out the hunters out there.
Gosh, that's what I love about the hunting community, just in general, man. And just as a hunter, I love the fact that there's always something you can work to improve on, right? You can work
absolutely.
to improve your shooting, improve your shot placement with your bow. You can work on your first aid. You can work on your elk calling. You can work on your turkey calling. All these things. It's just never ending, and I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to see this too. One of the things that what I'm trying to do here in Wisconsin is get in with the hunters education community while they're teaching young kids on how to, handle the firearm safety. It's like, hey, also teaching them basic first aid and, using tourniquets and being able to apply those dressings at a young age. I think those are life essential skills.
For sure. That's huge, man. My daughters are in hunter safety right now, and I'm like blown away with some of the things I feel like they're focusing too much on unimportant topics. First aid would be an important one. That for me, I mean, just kind of common sense.
Absolutely.
So, yeah,
absolutely. I'm right there with you.
Have you ever seen a product and it's called Zip Stitch?
Yes.
What's your take on that stuff?
I think those, I haven't used that one particular. I've used stuff like it. I think it definitely has its place, but I think you have to look at the type of wound that you have, because some of those adhesives, they weren't great for like straight cuts, but sometimes cuts. Yeah, if it's not a straight cut, sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to close. And I'm really excited at the way, with medical advancements that we're seeing. I think we're going to start seeing a lot of these in the future with some of these new like adhesive gels and things of that nature, where like liquid bandages. But yeah, the one thing with a lot of those self-closure devices, if you don't have a straight cut, it can be a little bit difficult in getting closure.
That's exactly what I wanted to kind of cover with that, because it's funny when you buy it. I bought one, and
I did too.
On the packaging, it's got this picture of this perfectly straight little cut. And I don't know about you, but when I cut, I'm looking at scars on my hands and arms right now from, mainly when I was a kid, not knowing how to use a pocket knife the right way, but none of them are straight. I mean, they're like all over the place. One looks like a Z, and I don't know how that zip stitch would work with something like that. What about any other myths out there? I'm thinking of things like, pouring a little gunpowder in your bleeding wound and lighting it to seal it off, kind of just crazy stuff. What else is out there that we should dispel?
No, definitely do not. So we actually, I'm sure you remember this too, when you were in the Marine Corps, that they used to have this stuff called Quick Clot. It was like a powder that we used to pour into the wound, similar to what they had on the Revenant with Hugh Glass, where he's got that neck wound that he self-cauterizes by lighting gunpowder on fire. But it was actually very kind of similar, where we would pour this adhesive into these wounds, and it would basically cause this chemical reaction and cauterize it. But what we found out is that it actually led to a lot of increase in mortality, because it would sear up all this good tissue as well. So we went away from using the powder, and we actually have these impregnated dressings now with these anti-bleeding properties to the bandages.
Yeah. That makes sense. I didn't know that. I'm glad you clarified that. I think I have some of that somewhere. But it's probably expired.
Yeah, well, and the other part too is, like, if a helicopter would come in, all that dust and powder, it was getting in people's eyes and causing reactions. So thankfully with technology, it's gone to where they've actually had these, impregnated dressings with these hemostatic properties. Like they use, one uses kaolin, another one uses it's like a shellfish type. It's like ground up shellfish, where it actually promotes, basically causes it to stop bleeding. Now, they do sell those, but I think for most of the hunting community, those dressings go for somewhere along the lines of like $40 to $50 for one dressing, where it's like, they're great dressings, don't get me wrong, but I've used, just regular gauze and been, just as successful, because for the most part, those dressings are meant to be packed into a wound, like a gunshot wound. And in order for those dressings to work, you actually have to hold direct pressure for about 3 minutes in order for those really to be effective. Yeah.
You kind of brought up something there. Let's talk about infection for a minute, and kind of, I know there's a lot of information out there, but when you do cut yourself fairly deep, and whether you're, I'm not talking tourniquet status or anything like that. Sure. You cut yourself, it's kind of bleeding, you put a bandage on it, but you want to stay in the field and keep hunting. And the worry that would come, from my end would be infecting that wound. What do you talk to us about infections on like a cut?
Yeah, absolutely. So the big thing I always like to tell people is the solution to pollution is dilution. So the more that you can clean out that wound, the better.
Clean it out with what, though?
anything that you have, if it's preferably water is the best way to do that. But you want to try to get as much of that, because as soon as you have bacteria that's on your skin, it helps to prevent infection. But as soon as you get a cut, that bacteria, not just from the soil, but even your own skin, can cause an infection. So the more that you can clean that out, I mean, you can just, again, if you have water there, perfect. Obviously it would be best if you boil that water first.
That's what I was going to get to. What about like river water?
If that's what you have and you don't have time to boil it, that's fine. But I would try to get if you have a sterile water source, like either in a Nalgene or a Camelback, that would be my first. And then like a local water source would probably be my second, just because you're going to have organisms in that water too.
And so just boil it, and like boil for 15 minutes or so, let it cool down, and then just kind of wash it off.
Just wash it off. Obviously you want to make sure that it cools down a little bit. Don't pour the scalding hot water on, but yeah, you want to try to make sure to get that clean as you can, and try to change that dressing daily. That's one of the other things that I see is like guys will put on a Band-Aid and they'll leave that Band-Aid on for, several days. Well, that's just going to help.
Damn.
That's a source. Yeah, right. And that's just a source to harbor infection. So, and a lot of times too, like people want to use that antibiotic ointment, which is great, but sometimes, they'll keep using it, and that antibiotic ointment then that's also can serve as, it doesn't allow the skin to appropriately heal.
Oh, okay. Because that's what I was going to ask you. I noticed there's not like Neosporin or something in your kit. And, I had a grandma, so I've used Neosporin for a long time.
Oh, yeah. It definitely has its place. But what I found is that a lot of people, like even working in the ER, it's great to put on initially, but if you keep putting it on over, over a week, what's going to happen is that skin, the surrounding tissue is just going to become so think about if you keep putting Vaseline on a specific area, that skin becomes soft, becomes moist, breaks down, and then it's not going to have that your skin is trying to naturally heal itself.
Okay.
So you have this area then that's just kind of this open wound.
So just if you're going to use that, use it initially right off the bat, and then don't put it on again after that.
Yeah, that's what I usually recommend to folks. And same thing, like when folks come into the emergency room, we stitch them up, we put some bacitracin or an antibiotic ointment over the top of it. And then, after that, we just tell them to try to keep it dry and keep it covered. And I usually tell folks if they do have a wound, you want to try to keep it covered and keep doing daily dressing changes. Okay. And obviously if the wound gets wet, you want to make sure that you change that bandage too. One thing I did want to bring up, because you mentioned boiling water, burns. So that's another thing that with guys with the portable stoves, I'm guilty of it too. So burns are definitely one specifically on the hands that we really, there's really not much we can do for them in the backcountry. But the one thing is a lot of people, when they get these blisters, they want to pop these blisters. I tell folks to leave the blisters alone, because the minute that you try to pop something, it's not going to be a sterile instrument that you're using, and you're going to be promoting infection the minute you try to, lance that blister of whatnot. So I always tell folks, keep it covered initially right after the burn. If you have something cold, it's definitely going to provide you some relief, whether that's a running water or like a creek nearby, definitely do that. But then just wrap a dry dressing around there. Some folks like to use wet dressings. The issue with that is if you use a wet dressing, that dressing is going to eventually dry. And when that dressing dries, it's going to pull that burned skin away from your body and be extremely painful.
What about same thing with your feet? Like if you get big blisters on your feet, don't pop those either, right?
No, we actually put some moleskin in our kits too, just for that, in case folks get hot spots. And you can also use some duct tape for that as well. Gotcha. But yeah, I recommend not popping blisters, just because when guys do that, they're not going to use like a sterile needle. They're going to use their pocket knife. They're going to use a toothpick or whatnot.
The same knife they just gutted a fish with 2 days ago. Yeah, I've done that.
Exactly. No, I've been there. I've been there too, and it's just and treating a lot of these blisters. I found over the years that just leaving them intact is it's going to be it's going to be much better for you than trying to pop them yourself.
And the other thing that I always think about is, well, that's not true. I'll just like you watch John Wayne pour bourbon or whiskey all over a cut. Does that actually clean anything?
No, yes, there is, there's alcohol in there, but if you think about it, what's in, bourbon, whiskey, things of that
That's
is
what
sugar.
I think. Exactly.
And it's going to, I do not tell people, like I always tell folks, they're like, yeah, I just poured a little Jack Daniel's Old Number 7 on it, and that took care of it. And it's like, oh, that's usually not how it goes, because there is a lot of sugar and alcohol, and I do not recommend that, because that's just going to promote bacteria love glucose, which is sugar, and it's just you're going to be asking for infection in that scenario.
See, I like a quick story on that. What you were at Fort Bragg, right? So yep. I would imagine you had a chigger problem out there.
Oh, absolutely.
And so for many of us out west, growing up in the West, I had no idea what chiggers were. And chiggers are like these little bugs that would, the way you blouse your boot in the military, they'd still get in there and get right up on your calf, and you'd get like this rash from all these chiggers. And I had this first sergeant. He'd be like, Marines, what you do is you go take your fingernails and just scratch it really hard, and then pour Jim Beam all over it, and then just let it dry. and so I took him up on this advice, and I go back to the barracks, and I'm like, I'm going to do what First Sergeant told me, and I'm scratching it, and it hurt really bad. And then I poured the bourbon on it, and that hurt even worse. And that was also, more than just the physical pain. It was also the pain of, a $10 bottle of Jim Beam back in the day. It was a lot of money for a young Marine.
Oh, absolutely.
So, and clearly it didn't work. It obviously didn't work. But I never told First Sergeant it didn't work. You don't argue with First Sergeant.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. You do bring up a good point there where, with the environment, like specifically plants and or like things like poison ivy. I'm always a big proponent of bringing out an antihistamine with me. So things like either Claritin or Benadryl. Benadryl or diphenhydramine has that property because it makes you a little drowsy. So a lot of guys will like to bring, Tylenol PM or Advil PM because you're a little sore after hiking, and it also has that, if you have like itching or runny nose allergies, it can help with that. The one thing I always caution folks about using those types of medications is it can dehydrate you. So that's one thing I always tell folks, hey, if you're bringing things like Claritin and Benadryl out, make sure that you're definitely replenishing yourself throughout the day with water, because that, dehydration, heat injuries, we see a ton of heat injuries in October, where it's like, we see more heat injuries actually in the fall and spring months than we do the summer months.
When I was in Iraq, the biggest share of casualties for our unit was heat casualty.
Right, absolutely.
It was a lot scarier than the enemy at that time. So, can you speak to that a little bit? Dehydration and what do you recommend hydration wise? Like a daily intake? Do you have like I know there's a lot of info out there, but I'd just like to hear it from somebody who, with you've spent a lot of time in some hostile desert environments. You probably have a pretty good opinion on that.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of folks, they say like, oh, hey, I don't drink a lot of water and I do just fine. Well, when your heart rate's up and, you're into that sympathetic drive, your muscles are firing, your blood's flowing, you're going to use up a lot more of your water requirement than you are just at home walking around. So I usually make it a goal to try to drink at least 4 Nalgene's. As I'm throughout the day. That's my goal. So it's roughly about a gallon of water.
Okay.
Because you can really, when you think about it, when you're sweating, you're in the mountains. The hard part is like specifically in September, it may be 40 degrees outside and you might be like, man, I'm kind of cold, but you're still sweating. Your body is still burning calories and you're losing water and you don't realize it. People are like, oh, I'm getting a headache or I'm getting muscle cramps. And even, don't just try to slam water all at once. I usually try to just drink it throughout the day. And people get worried about conserving water. That I understand that. Trust me, we've been in situations where we've ran out of water, and it wasn't fun. But at the same time, you never want to get yourself into those situations. So anytime that I'm near water, I always stop, fill up my water tanks or whatever I'm carrying, if it's a Camelback or an Algae, whatever you're running, and then continuously drinking that throughout the day. And if you have some sort of electrolyte replacement mix, there's a lot of different flavors out there. I highly recommend I usually use one in the morning and then one in the evening, just to keep myself, just because a lot of times, we're not getting the daily salt intake that you may be getting, because I think people underestimate the number of calories that they burn in the mountains.
I agree.
I mean,
yeah.
And I think that's one thing where people just, I didn't realize how many calories I was burning until, I started actually tracking and seeing how many calories I used on my watch. And just one day, and I was like, well, that can't be accurate. And then sure enough, the next, I was like, yeah, that is actually really accurate. So I think water intake is extremely vital when you're out west.
Yeah, we've all met that person. I keep wanting to say guy, but we've all met that. It usually is a dude. Oh, I'm so tough. I don't need the water. I get by just fine. But I mean, is it a thing that if you let yourself get dehydrated, it like really stresses out your heart and can create like actual heart problems down the road, or is that just a myth?
Well, I think it's one of those situations where it's not so much the heart issue, it's the electrolyte abnormalities that can come because you're dehydrated. Mm-hmm. So that's where it can come into play. We've also, I know you've probably seen this in the military too, from your time in the Marines, where people can actually overhydrate themselves as well, and that can be a huge issue. Fortunately for the hunting community, that's usually not the case.
Yeah.
It's usually just not drinking appropriately. The other thing too is eating. That's the other thing too, is a lot of folks, they don't want to carry the food. They don't want to, I usually recommend carrying foods that are like high quick gains, throughout the day, like gummy bears or some trail mix to keep that blood glucose level up, because that's going to keep you active. And when you're active, you're going to be drinking more water. You're going to be moving with a purpose, and you're just going to overall feel a heck of a lot better than trying to just conserve and just eat, one meal a day type thing.
Yeah. I've been guilty of that, where I'm like, you know what, I'm fine. I don't need to eat. I'm good. And I'll go like all day and then just not eat anything until night. And I always feel like shit the day after that. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
And so
yep,
I found that if you just force yourself to keep the calories coming in and just stay on a schedule with it or whatever, it's not about that day. It's about the days after that and the longevity you could stay in the field. And so that's just my take on it. I'm just a dude that doesn't know anything about any of this, but no, this has been awesome, man.
I'm right there with you.
Tell us a little bit about, like, you're a great resource, man. Tell us a little bit about Orion Medical Consulting and kind of what your plans are and where people can find you, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So our website is, we're at orionmedical.org. We also have a Facebook page and an Instagram page. And really our goal is to become a resource for the hunting community on all things medical. We want to be, just like in special operations, we're a force multiplier. We want to do the same thing for the hunting community, where we want to help educate people to go out and train their hunting partners on just basic first aid. This is something that, just like what you guys are doing on your podcast, where you're helping to educate those folks out there on elk calling and spot and stalk tactics. That's what we want to help do on the medical side. We're getting people, comfortable with using tourniquets, showing them how to use it, showing them, basic splinting, things that are, because those guys might be coming to get me or my family. They might just be passing by, and I might be in a bad way. And, they might be the ones rendering aid. And, a lot of people think that, hey, it's the nurses and the doctors they're doing all this stuff. But I can tell you, from treating casualties in combat, it wasn't anything that I did. It was their buddy that put the tourniquet on, or that, the 18-year-old kid stuffing a dressing in a guy's neck wound that was bleeding out and saved his life.
Yeah.
It was like, if that kid wouldn't have been there and didn't know know-with-all, that person wouldn't be here today.
Great point.
And I think that's where we want to go. Is we want to be a resource for the hunting community and really give back and to the way that the hunting community has helped us.
God, that's fantastic, man. I love it. I love the mission. I love the kit. And just you guys listening, if you do jump on that website, which I'll put it in the show notes. So there's going to be probably both the Instagram and the website in the show notes. Check that out. The outdoor first aid kit is $124.95. And it has got all the essentials that we talked about. I mean, that's actually a pretty good deal. And I mean, this is awesome, man. I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing you've got a lot of experience. I'd love to have you back on the show in the future. You could be like the go-to medical guy for the Western Huntsman podcast.
Hey, I'd love to help. I really appreciate you having me on, and thanks again for your service too, Jim. That's awesome.
Hey, you bet. But I've got some future seminar ideas for you. So we're gonna have to stay in touch. But yeah, this is awesome. Guys, check it out. Jimmy, thanks a bunch for coming on the show. I can't thank you enough. I'm really glad. I gotta call Dirk now and tell him thanks again because this is perfect.
Well, thanks again. I really appreciate it. And thanks again for what you do.
Yeah, no problem, man. Let's keep in touch, and we'll talk soon.
All right, sounds good. Semper Fi.
Semper Fi. You made it all the way to the end. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. We sure appreciate your support. This is Jim Huntsman signing off and reminding you to check us out at Instagram at The Western Huntsman and on Facebook at The Western Huntsman. And you can also check out the website at thewesternhuntsman.com. Thanks again. We'll see you guys next time. Stay Western, and I'll see you on the mountain.